Hello, and welcome to a new edition of TeachTalk, a project of creative universities. Today, I am talking to Mieke Lopes Cardoso at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, where she teaches development studies at the School of Geography, Planning, and International Development Studies. Where, what, and who do you teach?
So where is in the city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And this is also the place that I call home. It's the city of Amsterdam attracts a wide range of international students as I teach in international development studies. So the where actually has become much more present in my thinking on education and on the kind of type of student population that we have and that I have the privilege to work with, which is mostly European international, but we do also have some non-European students from really different parts of the world. So it's a truly international classroom, so to say. Of course, we also have some Dutch students, but all of our teaching is done in English. Yeah, so the students I work with mostly are in their master's kind of stage, but I also work with some undergraduate students at bachelor's level, as well as PhD and postdoc and kind of other levels. But most of my kind of teaching engagements are with master students and last year of bachelor students. Teach in the research master's and master's program in international development studies, and the focus of my teaching as well as my research has really focused on the transformative role of education in development processes, in inclusive development, and more recently looking more into regenerative approaches to development. And I've had the honor to do research in a number of contexts around the world, especially in conflict-affected regions, in Indonesia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, and Bolivia. And I really got a lot of inspiration in working in those contexts with teachers, with students, with policymakers. So I draw on the stories and the insights and the wisdom from these diverse contexts when I design my teaching here in the Netherlands and when I work with this international body of students.
Great. I think that ties really nicely into my next question, which is about critical creative pedagogy, which is at the heart of the Creative Universities project. So what does that particular pedagogy mean for you, and how does it relate to your own teaching practice?
And first of all, I have to say that I find it really, really inspiring the way that kind of your project and your webpage brings together these insights on critical and creative pedagogy. So that sparked a lot of my thinking in kind of preparing for this talk together. So what it means for me, I could go into various different routes, but maybe it's helpful to just explain a little bit of kind of besides my role as being a lecturer in international development studies, telling a little bit more about the rest of who I am, because that actually for me is very much grounding the way that I engage as an educator with students and colleagues and all other colleagues in the broader university context. So for me, I mean, when I get up in the morning, the first thing I am is a Reiki practitioner and a yoga practitioner already for quite a long time. That has been a daily practice and how I start my day, so that when my next activity is being a mother and also being kind of a broader family member in my home, is that I kind of bring that into the way that I raise our kids. And then the next thing usually I do is to focus on the other part of work that I do, which is mostly based at university. So that is teaching, which is really something that I'm passionate about. As I mentioned before, my teaching focuses also on the role of education in development and transformation processes. So I study and research and teach and spend a lot of my thinking time on what transformative education / social justice education / critical creative education can look like. And not only teaching about the topic, I realized a number of years ago that I had been trained myself to teach from an expert role and to teach the topic content-wise. But I realized in actually making education more transformative and trying to attempt to walk the talk of what it means to become an educator that engages with critical pedagogy, with transformative pedagogy, with regenerative approaches to education, considerations of social justice really actually means that I had to change the way I was understanding education and I was designing education. So that's very much about the process. And so kind of that shift in my understanding really originated in the work that I started to do in a training that I am still engaged in with the Regenerative Development and Design School called Regenesis Institute. And so the faculty and colleagues there over the last 6 years or so have really helped me to bring all of those versions of me. So the kind of the yoga trained teacher that I also am, but also just me, Mieke, as a mother, and Mieke as a citizen in the Dutch society, to bring all of those versions of me, Mieke the art lover, into the classroom, and to allow the classroom to become a space where students can not just absorb, which is kind of the traditional banking education type of model, but really to engage in a co-creative process and to focus our collective learning journey on the formation of agency, the development of agency of students, and at the same time of myself as an educator. So that co-creation process has actually been really instrumental, I would say, in how at the moment I'm thinking about and reflecting on what critical, transformative, and more creative forms of education are. And creative then both in terms of bringing creative alternative pedagogies and bringing the arts into the classroom in that sense, but also really looking at the root of the term creative to allow students to connect to their own unique creative essence, which is what brought them in the first place into such a privileged position of being in a university. Because of course, that's only a few people that we actually get to work with. And so it's really building on that incredible talent and unique kind of intelligence that all of these students bring in, and all of their various backgrounds and all of their variations of their identities that they bring in to co-create the learning space together.
How that translates into your classrooms and how your students are learning from those.
Yeah, so one that just springs to mind, kind of based on what I mentioned before, is that I've experimented with a small group of students over the past 5 years in a space which we called Critical Diversity and Development Explorations, CDDE. And so this was a space where motivated master students could kind of select themselves to become part of that teaching innovation project they did that in their portfolio time, so they received some study credits for it. And together we really explored bringing so-called alternative pedagogies and approaches into the classroom. And one of the approaches that we started to try out is to design, so to co-create the sessions. And for me, on the basis of the co-creation on the theme that students really wanted to work on. So for instance, there has been a session on academic activism, and students really wanted to create space to reflect together about what does it mean to engage in academic activism in their respective thematic interest areas. And so what I then brought in as a technique as well is that in my own kind of practice as a meditator, but also a trained yoga teacher, I designed a short guided meditation, reflection exercise, brought that into the classroom to set the scene, also to allow students to really arrive. And building on that, I usually design a couple of wake-up questions, oftentimes drawing on living system frameworks that I derive from the regenerative development work. And then that sets kind of the group up for a conversation which starts from a completely different starting point than as if people come in with all of their kind of to-do list and scattered minds and kind of unfocused kind of states of being. So really allowing that just a couple of minutes of some focused either breathing techniques or maybe some really training the mind to become an observer of what we notice in terms of our bodies, and allowing kind of that state of focus to then reflect individually and journal writing on a couple of questions, and then from there engage into a debate, usually creates a different atmosphere for students to work in. And because I could do that these first couple of years in this small group of motivated students that were really open to do so, we could together kind of test a bit the boundaries about what is useful, how can we really design this together. And in a way, I've also started to reflect on of how to connect that then and how to bring in students' own sense of agency by building on these reflective journal questions, bringing in structured living systems frameworks more continuously, so that students themselves, the more senior members in that group, are now also able to kind of design such sessions themselves. So it's really also trying to, in the co-creation and preparation process, to not just do it me, myself, and I as the lecturer, deliver something and leave it there, but to engage students. And then I always try to, from that smaller group and that smaller intervention, then I usually co-create and work with a couple of students that have been part of that intervention in my bachelor courses or master courses. So they co-design those courses with me. And I always try to always have a student that is also participating in the course to be part of the design team. So it's from that smaller CDDE project and the testing that we could do of bringing in alternative forms of pedagogy that we've then tried to translate that co-creation process and the contemplative or mindfulness oriented pedagogies to also bring that into the broader classroom in a way that aims to be more inclusive in its approach.
How are your students kind of responding to that? Have you just kind of, what kind of feedback are you getting on those, breathing exercises and just really radical co-creation by the sounds of it?
So there's of course differences in this small group of highly motivated students that are really up for radical change. Their motivation is already very high. So their commitment into the co-creation process, of course, is also very kind of enthusiastic. But also within that group, there's been some initial hesitation or even a bit of tension with the contemplative practices. And I feel that that's been very helpful in trying to design it in such a way that it's not meant to convince anyone of these practices and that everyone should be doing them, but it's to invite the learners in that setting. So in the smaller groups or in the bigger groups, I've now kind of applied this work in groups of up to 70, 80 students in the bachelor courses, in both online and in-class variations. And I mean, even there, it's always about trying to design such a moment in such a way that it's open for those who want to try it out, but for people that feel uncomfortable by closing their eyes, I always give options to not close your eyes or to just listen to what is being said. So I try to invite people in such a way that they can try it without forcing people to do so. I remember in the first years, I used to do most of those exercises in break time so that students could either choose to be there or not. But I realized that that was good for me to try it out. But it wasn't necessarily generating the shift in energy in the way that the group was working together within the whole group. And so, yeah, it's a bit of trial and error. I've had only a few responses from students who really found it very challenging. Some of them came back a bit later on and mentioned that they were very grateful for the opportunity because actually it had helped them. And actually one of the cases, I'm thinking back of one student who said that she really felt that the brief kind of guided meditation moments in class were the hardest for her. But that she noticed that even though it was so hard for her to pause and to really check in with how she was doing, it did provide her with the opportunity to experiment with it or to explore. And she actually from there started to develop her own practice of meditation. So for her, it worked out well. But I mean, it's not, for some people, going for a run is as meditative as being still and doing a breathing exercise. So I know there are so many different ways of shifting the state of mind, and that's really the purpose. It's really about becoming more conscious. And so I try to become more understanding of kind of how to connect these contemplative practices to our aims to work on inequalities and social justice, so that we it's always tied in a way to the inner work that we do, looking at our patterns of thinking, observing how we feel when we engage in conversations about positionality in the field of development studies, but connecting those really also then to what do these reflections mean for how we then interact with the outside world, with our conversation partners in the classroom, beyond the classroom, in our research engagements. So it's really trying to connect the reflections on our inner work and changing the workings of our mind so that who we can be in the outside world becomes more conscious and more aware.